Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. My OBS crashed 2 seconds before I restarted it, so 2 seconds before now. I really hope that everything will work today. It seems like everything is quite all right, but as always, please let me know if my audio and video quality is working all right for you, if the stream is stable and stuff like that. Today, we are sort of continuing our WWDC coverage. It's not directly related to Apple's announcements in the sense that, well, we have talked about Apple Intelligence up and down, about iOS 18, even about the hardware restrictions or software restrictions, I guess. It's always weird how people name this. Like the fact that Apple Intelligence works with M1 devices and up, and iPhone 15 Pro and up, and we've also mentioned some reasons, potential reasons for that during our last stream. Now Tailosive text Drew, who I really like his channel. I followed him for quite a while. Less than a day ago, put out a video saying he doesn't love Apple Intelligence and brought up some reasons why he thinks some things in there are weird, some of them are not as big as people make them out to be, and that the hardware requirements are kind of scummy. Now, there will be things in there that I agree with. There will be things there that I vehemently disagree with. This is not an attack on Drew. Drew is a nice guy. Drew, in general, has pretty good opinions. However, that does not mean he is safe from us in that regard, which is obviously that sometimes his points are, I would say, somewhat disconnected from the tech enthusiast space. Over the last year or two, he's been trying very much to be more like man of the people and experimenting with cheaper devices and stuff like that. Ultimately, he went back to an iPhone 15 Pro anyway. And then he sold his Apple Watch and he sold his old iPad. So now he's basically an iPhone and Mac guy and an Apple TV guy, as far as I know. So I dislike that trend. It's not that I believe that you have to have every single Apple device, but I believe if you already have it and you're kind of like a tech reviewer, not kind of, he is a tech YouTuber, I guess. It's not like he reviews absolutely everything, but he does reviews too. I believe it's weird to get rid of stuff that you already have, because that stuff can help you be informed and it will help you do your future reviews. It will help you do comparisons between Apple devices and the competition. So yeah, that's at least my take on this, the general trend of Tailosive tech. But that's not the main discussion here. I just wanted to say that this is not an attack video. This is going to be using Drew's video as a baseline for a discussion that I think can be very interesting about Apple Intelligence. And we've actually talked about Tim Cook's interview with MKBHD in the last video, where he mentioned quite a lot of stuff about Apple Intelligence. This is why I also already have potential counter arguments to why iPhone Pro exclusivity is not fake in that regard. And Jan Hendrik, my most loyal German viewer, probably one of 20 at most, is joining. Good evening to you, sir, as well. Yeah, before we do go into a lot of Drew stuff, though, is I know where the bread and butter of this channel is. Believe me, guys. I'm not stupid. I would be talking about processors all day, like Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, detailed benchmark analysis, potential for 8 Gen 4, what the X925 core looks like, the reference design from ARM, 4 nanometer versus 3 nanometer advantages, M3 versus M4, FP16 versus Int 8 calculations on neural engines and stuff like that. However, there isn't always new stuff out there, and there are people way more knowledgeable about this. There is, however, one chip that we have discussed a lot on this broadcast, I guess, and that is the Snapdragon X Elite. The Snapdragon X Elite having now been announced for almost well, for basically a human gestational period of like 8-9 months. Um, it will be powering like the latest generation of Windows on ARM devices. It will be the first processor to natively support all Copilot Plus features. Yes, that is actually a little bit part of a controversy that is going on here. Now we are probably next week finally getting like our first like comprehensive reviews of Snapdragon X Elite products. Like one of the main ones that seems to be getting a lot of attention is the Samsung Book 4 Edge. Probably because it's the only model right now, at least of any that I could find, that has the highest end chip inside. So, however, we had some benchmarks leak for it, and a Twitter friend of the show Raphael, where is he? If I pronounce even this correctly, Reddit users, no, Jesus Christ, is the website like not loading everything? Is it my ad blocker? I have no idea. Basically, the point was that a lot of Snapdragon X Elite results were between 17 and 1800 single core points in Geekbench 6, which is obviously far below the 2900 that they promised. And the highest ones we could find for a while were around 2500. Yeah, and I like Drew's background with the iPhone boxes and Apple stuff as well. I do have some background behind me. I am experimenting for now with the macOS Sequoia backgrounds, but yeah, over time, when I finally hang up my silver play button, I will probably be switching back to like a proper background. Yeah, so the benchmarks were quite low, and in fact, when we actually look at Geekbench 6, and I specifically looked for the Galaxy Book 4 Edge, now we do have some complete outlier results, which I have no idea what this would be. Like, no X Elite chip is that gimped. Like even an X Plus would greatly outperform this. So I assume this is like a low power mode inside Windows. And this honestly made me worry because I kind of assumed this was the low power mode, right? Because if you look at it, this is half the single core performance of Apple's M4 processor, and at less than 12,000 points in Geekbench multi-core. Now we are talking about a chip that competes more with M3 than it does M4, despite having more the power consumption of an M3 Pro. So you can imagine how far behind the potential M4 Pro it would be. So those were the results that we're getting day by day. And then we got a few results like this, like around the 2500 mark, some going as high as 2600. And I assumed this was kind of it, but this is not the highest end X Elite, which probably means that you can configure the Galaxy Book 4 Edge with all kinds of X Elite variants. And then, of course, you have to consider that, of course, the results here are subject to like Windows performance modes setup. So that's kind of a mind F already. But then we got some results like this. This seems like to be the fully unleashed the Snapdragon X Elite, even including like multi-core results over 15,000, which before some people will say, well, that is even more than the base M4. The M4 consists out of 4 performance and 6 efficiency cores. So 10 cores overall, with more than half of them being efficiency cores. This just has 12 performance cores. So yeah, I would be shocked if it didn't reach those results. Quite honestly, I think it should be more like this all the time, not just in high performance mode. And yeah, so I do want to cover the X Elite, guys, but the slow rollout of data makes it basically impossible to me, right? So because I did like comment on Twitter about stuff like this, right? The fact that results were coming in below that. But I myself found results in the 2500 range. So I was like, maybe that's the peak performance, but that was also then not the highest end chip, which does mean also that there will be like a 20% variant in single core performance, which like between 4.2 and 3.8 gigahertz, but that's actually should be only a 10% difference, so it's really hard to tell. Yeah, Jan, yeah, we all should be running out and buying those Galaxy books. But it's not just the Galaxy book. We will see probably a lot of discrepancies in those results for X Elite devices, as I said, based on the individual chip variants, but then also based on the power profile of the laptop, right? That will depend on the software partially, like in Windows, whether it's set it to low power, balanced, high performance, whatever. And of course, on top of that, it will depend on how much cooling does your device support and things like that. So maybe like high performance modes for the fully high-end version, like some devices might give you 80 watts or something like that, just of cooling performance, right? Doesn't mean the chip itself will actually consume 80 watts, right? And another device might peak at like 50 watts, and then it will already behave differently. So I have no idea, to be honest. I know that the Galaxy Book devices are like, those are not the Galaxy Books, by the way. Those are reference devices from Qualcomm. You can tell that by the red color and egregiously large bezels. But the Galaxy Books are like not known to be like the most ambitious ones in terms of cooling, so it was kind of surprising to see it be like one of those devices that adopts the highest end variant. Also, the highest end variant being more expensive, so the money has to go somewhere. But yeah, I definitely don't expect it to underperform the iPhone 12 mini in terms of single core results. But it was funny still to see like even balanced mode come below 2,000 points. Did I watch the interview between Tim and MKBHD? Yeah, I watched it in my last stream, so feel free to check it out. I felt sorry for Tim at the end, because Tim obviously like took this seriously, and he tried to even give like MKBHD some retrospectives on those devices. And the only thing we got out of that fundamentally, like I can show that here, by the way, right? So we basically had like have reacted to this. I've summarized what he said about AI and whatever, and then there was that blind rating, which, for one, this is not really Tim's MO. Like, he's not even of the generation that does stuff like that, much less, like, he's the CEO. He cannot just blindly rank the products according to what's better or not. He's supposed to show some love for everything, even the Magic Mouse. And everything we sort of got out of that interview ultimately was like, oh, Tim wasn't able to say much about the Magic Mouse, except for that they took long enough to figure the ergonomics. In fact, even like one of my longtime viewers on my channel later commented that I seem to know more about the Magic Mouse and its connection to like OS X Lion and whatever, and how Apple was integrating multi-touch at that time, right? But I mean, Tim is so much freaking busier, even with my job at the hospital. Like, yeah, it's really not the same. So I just wanted to say, like, give Tim a break. I think he did remarkably well. But I think MKBHD's energy, like very youthful, very active, even though he was calm and collected, I'll give him that, is just a wrong fit for Tim. And like, Tim is much better suited for like your Good Morning Americas and whatever, like your standard like TV interviews and things like that. And of course, talking to investors. And I think he actually does a pretty good job at like keynotes, talking and whatever. But yeah, he's not Steve Jobs, but also even when you look at current Apple, he's like not Craig and the other guys, right? So take it as you want. Like, he's not John Turnus, not even Eddie Q. He does a very different job. So yeah, I felt a little bit bad for him. But just to briefly finish up what we were saying, right? So I will be covering the X Elite like reviews when they come out next week. Part of that is also like, even with like Ryzen AI 300 PCs being on the way, laptops primarily, of course, for now the Copilot Plus stuff will be will be exclusive to the X Elite devices. Now, that does come with the caveat that the highest end Copilot Plus feature, which is Windows Recall, is not coming, or it's only available now in the beta or whatever. It's really a shit show. And I the reason why I partially thought about it before we talk about this video is that people are like blaming Apple for making some stuff exclusive to like iPhone 15 Pro and M1 and up, right? Meanwhile, Microsoft is making a feature exclusive to a chip that didn't even like exist on consumer products when they announced it. Like, I know you can do some workarounds and put that feature maybe to run on the GPU or whatever, but given that this is mostly like an OCR feature, right, just text recognition basically, I just find it funny just how differently people treat scummy moves by Microsoft versus somewhat much less scummy moves by Apple. So yeah, I do not want to go too deep into benchmarks. You can see the range is wide. The features themselves are a little hard to nail down because some are announced, some are not official though, in terms of like some are still will be in beta even when the X Elite comes out. And then of course I cannot compare those features on like latest AMD chips or whatever, but partially because we also don't yet have those latest AMD or Intel chips out there. So basically Computex was a lot of like fireworks around all that stuff with AI and things like that, and fundamentally it will end up with the fact that Apple already has like 2 generations of 3 nanometer chips already out there, while we are greatly awaiting a new generation of 4 nanometer chips from AMD and Qualcomm, while we'll have to wait like almost half a year before we see like 3 nanometer plus 6 nanometer chips from Intel. So I just wanted to say that's a little bit funny to me. So this was basically a little bit of like outlook for the future, not Windows outlook, but because I think it wouldn't work on my devices with Microsoft's recent track record. Yeah, but I just wanted to say we will have more to cover on those issues. So please stay informed. Please keep me posted, and then I will keep you posted once, of course, those reviews are out there. We will react to those reviews. We'll have a look at the benchmarks. There is now like, if you want to, you can go to like an NTAG and see the detailed architectural breakdown of the X Elite. I'm not as much interested in that. It's just what the end result for the end consumer is. But I know a lot of people watching this channel are like very, very tech savvy, more even so than I am. And I just wanted to encourage you guys to, if you wanted more info, there are places to get it. So next is our real topic of today, which is Drew's video about Apple Intelligence. Now, I won't be writing that much down because we obviously went so much already into everything about it during the iOS 18 like analysis, post WWDC, and the way we analyzed Tim Cook's interview with MKBHD and other stuff online. But let's see what Drew has to say. I don't think I'll put like it's is it a 9-minute video really? Yeah, okay, so it's a rather short video, so I won't be increasing the speed. I'll just let it all like have its maximum impact both on me and on you, and you can let me know if you agree with it, if you disagree with it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you think there's like a nuanced middle to have. So let's see.
Hey Tim, I was hoping that... Good morning! Hi, yes, good. I was just hoping that, Siri could maybe understand context a little bit better. Well, yes, but you'll have to buy the new iPhone. Oh, okay, so I can get it on the 15
Yes, but only the Pro.
Okay, well, sometimes I'm not able to speak to her, so it'd be nice if I could just text her directly.
Well, yes, but you'll have to buy the new iPhone.
Oh, okay, yeah. It'd also be kind of nice if, how we lift subjects from photos, if we could kind of get rid of the ones in the background.
Well, yes, but you'll have to buy the new iPhone.
Yes. Right. Okay. And
So you guys can see what his main issue is, right? His main complaint is basically that Apple is hiding a lot of features behind like the latest hardware. Now he is specifically mentioning the iPhone because that's the device that makes his point the best. He ignores the fact that we have at this point 3-year-old iPads and over 3.5-year-old Macs that will support all those features. But and there are technical reasons for that beyond just like, oh, this app was not ported to this older device, which sometimes Apple doesn't do, right? Sometimes when Apple stops supporting like a major operating system version, people will be asking, well, like there are new iMessage features, right? And I have a device that still supports iMessage and everything like that. Will you port that new iMessage app to that device? Like, it's not like it needs new hardware, right? Or that it needs to be implemented specifically in that new version of iOS. And Apple's argument is like, no, we built our software as a package. If we give you a new iMessage version, we make sure it works best with the new operating system. It keeps on getting optimized for throughout the year that new operating system version is out, right? So you can agree or disagree with it. I've of course, like the Android community over the years has said, well, we might get like fewer OS updates, but we get like potentially way longer app updates, right? So there are two sides to every coin here, and Apple definitely sometimes deserves criticism when sometimes they drop a device for no apparent reason or just too quickly in general. But I think this idea that like, oh, you need the new iPhone for that. Yeah, if we are talking iPhones, sure, but then every M1 device and better supports those features too.
you know, could I just get some new emojis, maybe?
Well, yes,
But
but
you are getting new emojis. Like the emoji consortium will still post like normal updates. And in fact, Apple has done a ton of work to make like their Genmoji compatible to the point that you can actually view them on devices that have nothing to do with Apple Intelligence. It's just that generating them requires the kind of large language models that have to be pre-installed on device, that take up storage, take up RAM when they run. This is the difference.
you'll have to buy the new iPhone.
I'll leave you alone.
Well, wait!
Yes, Tim?
Don't you want to send creepy AI-generated imagery to your friends and family?
No.
Well, yes, you do, and to do that, you'll have to buy the new iPhone.
All right, okay, I get it.
This is something that Craig has talked about. Craig Federighi, basically Apple's boss of software. It seems like image generation, like not just Genmoji, but like where you actually generate like those square images, and it comes in 3 styles, like cartoons or sketches or paintings, whatever. And basically the point seems to be that he loves generated imagery just as something to play around with, and he was really, really eager to integrate it in a way that runs in a secure, private way, integrates with all your existing apps, things like that. Maybe it doesn't need you to cost money or too much server wait time on ChatGPT or something like that. So to me, I don't know why people are like, oh, this is so creepy. It's like, yeah, I mean, you can draw creepy stuff too. You can sketch creepy stuff too. Like, I know that there's like a soulless argument here, but a lot of what tech does for us is soulless, right? Even if even the stuff if autocorrects or autocompletes a sentence is not the way a human, like, I mean, sure, grammar is grammar and math is math, but everything when it comes to like predicting stuff, that's already a little bit us like relying on soulless technology. So I just always get like weird vibes when people over focus on that. Like, don't get me wrong, there are huge potential issues with generated imagery, like intellectual property protection, reimbursement of artists whose work this has been trained on, of course the potential misuse for stuff like fake news or revenge porn and things like that. There is a lot to consider, but I don't think we can always blame the underlying technology. Fact is that underlying technology will keep evolving, and I would rather have like a lighthearted alternative that Apple puts into every new iPhone from here on out, rather than people only going to like Chat GPT and Microsoft Copilot and whatever for those features. That's at least my perspective.
There has been so much talk in the media and online just about Apple Intelligence, but I think what annoys me the most about it is it's all about how it works and not so much what it does.
That's based on two things. For one, it's not quite true. People have talked about new features like Siri's better understanding of on-device functionality, of Siri basically taking like corrections mid-speech, Siri knowing your last request and contextualizing your new request with the last one. And then, of course, all those other features like basically Apple's alternatives to Magic Eraser, and stuff like the generated imagery, like Genmoji, the grammar correction, the suggestion to basically rewrite the text or even like auto-complete it almost. That is all stuff people talk about. However, the reason why we talk more about Apple's like differentiated approach, for one, it has to do because it's actually a very, very differentiated approach, right? It didn't just like, oh, it's like 5% difference from everything that the other guys do. No, it's drastically different from anything that Google does with Gemini, Microsoft does with Copilot. Even today, like Sam Altman from OpenAI said he wants to transition the company to a for-profit company that isn't run anymore by a non-profit oriented board, right? So basically all the old ideals of OpenAI are completely out the window. NVIDIA basically like the king of helping build data servers and things like that, but also they like data collection themselves whenever they can get their hands on it. And they of course put their stuff into stuff like DLSS and CUDA over the years. So yeah, it's a very, very differentiated approach, not just because of on-device machine learning, but also the way Apple differently treats private cloud compute, the way Apple, even for Apple, by the way, a differentiated approach historically is Apple does work with other companies to provide certain services, right? For example, Google Maps and YouTube's historical integration into iOS are already good examples of that, but then there were also small examples like Twitter and Facebook being always part of the share sheet at the time when there still wasn't like a public API for third-party developers to integrate themselves into the share sheet. And even the fact that you could send tweets through Siri because Apple partnered so deep with Twitter at that time, right? They would never do that these days, given Elon, but that's another discussion. But yeah, this is why people talk about that stuff, because it's actually like different. It's different for Apple with like, oh, we have on-device stuff, we have private cloud compute. Oh, and then on top of that, you can put alternatives. And then, of course, the way it all compares to the rest of the industry. It's worth talking about. Don't forget, it hasn't been a week yet since WWDC. It's been 5 days, of course. And people are like, every news site wants to talk about it, right? And everyone having an interview with Craig Federighi or Tim Cook or Eddie Q or Jeff Williams or whatever, they will ask the same questions, partially to just nail them down on like basically certain key points. It's not like people are regurgitating the same thing over and over again. It's just that more people are talking about it. It's reached more of the broader like mass media. I was like working out at the gym. There's like a TV in the background, and I could see like basically like a German talk show talk about it. I could see like not the subtitles, but like the basically the subheaders below flowing down, and they were saying like Apple new approach to like AI, but in German. And I was like, oh yeah, now it's reached like those kinds of shows, and probably in the next 2-3 weeks Tim Cook will keep on going on American talk shows and giving interviews like that, and then people will translate that and regurgitate that all over other media stuff. So yeah, I just find it weird when people are saying, well, why do we focus on that? it's because it's genuinely interesting, and once one person talks about it, other people want to talk about it too. That's the nature of news, that's the nature of YouTube. It's not like we complain about like Ukraine war news only coming from more than one channel, right? That's, of course, that is going to happen. It's an important subject that many people want to talk about.
I think that's the part about Apple Intelligence that doesn't really sit right with me. I'm not trying to say that the new features aren't helpful or handy. Of course, being able to summarize an email or get a transcript of a phone call or generate, disturbing imagery, all of those things are helpful and useful, and I can't wait to try them myself. I do have a 15 Pro, before all of you write, you're just jealous you're not going to get these new features. No, my MacBook will get all of the new Apple Intelligence features, as will my iPhone, but Apple typically has always been super focused on the user experience. They never dwelled that much on like what's going on behind the scenes, whereas with this tech, it feels like 80% of the talk about Apple Intelligence is, okay, Apple has their own large language.
Yeah, but the part about it is also like we already know the kind of capabilities that LLMs at this point are capable of having. And the third point that why people are talking about how Apple Intelligence works rather than what exactly it does, it comes down to the fact that the beta released with no Apple Intelligence in it, right? Unless you count like the math calculations. So people really like at this point do want to experience the new Siri, the new Apple Intelligence stuff before talking more about the actual features. But what they can talk more about right now is the differentiated approach. And I know like people who are deeply in the know will complain about that, but you don't know how many people I've seen online who still regurgitate the same disproven points. Oh, it's just a wrapper for ChatGPT. Oh, Apple is collecting all your data. Oh, you sheep are like you're getting like the same stuff, and Apple is just as bad as Google or whatever, right? All that bullshit where Apple is like, bro, we literally partner with like third-party security companies to analyze our code and to make sure that we never put a line of code in there that gives us access. And people are like, nope, still just the same as what Google and Microsoft do. And I'm like, what? Like, I understand skepticism, but this is skepticism, this is skepticism pretending to be intelligence. This is not actual skepticism. It's the same bullshit as all the red pillar guys who are like, oh, the government believes in vaccines? Well, guess what? Who doesn't? This guy. It's like, it's such uninformed bullshit. It's like, it's not actually a cohesive discussion. You can doubt things. You can do research on stuff. You can have a very nuanced position on stuff that might seem binary to other people. I'll not mention any political subjects where that applies to me. But yeah, it's just as funny that like people will be like, oh yeah, it's like, all of it is bullshit. You believe Apple is private? I'm like, well, Apple has been pushing for like privacy for a decade now, and there have never been like big cases about them stealing data or selling data or even creating like mass user profiles or something like that. Well, yeah, I do kind of believe them. I don't believe them blindly, but unless there is like a big like thing that I don't know about, yeah. And yeah, this is why Tim Cook is talking about that, because a lot of people still don't know how Apple is different from those companies.
Models that run natively, okay? They run on device, and nobody else is going to have access to those, but you need the certain chip to access Apple Intelligence. But then if there's something Apple's own models are not capable of doing, then it'll ask you specifically every single time if you would like to ask ChatGPT. No. You forgot a big important middle step. This is why, like, Drew sometimes is very fast in making videos and whatever, but I've seen like that problem in his original coverage of DubDub. Private cloud compute sits firmly between on-device processing and eventually asking OpenAI or Google Gemini
for more info, right? Basically, on-device stuff is everything that is, and private cloud compute is everything that works with your personal context, with stuff that Apple has on you, your contacts, your reminders, your notes, your photos, whatever. And then for everything that those things either cannot handle or you need word knowledge, then it asks OpenAI or like at some point another alternative. Like this private cloud compute actually matters because for one, it's expensive infrastructure to build because as anybody knows, Siri, as dumb as she is a very, very widely used feature. And if she gets a lot better, can you imagine what like the server load will be for Apple to handle all that stuff? That will be like $5 to $10 billion a year, probably in extra cost. So this is why they, for free, partnered with OpenAI, which is absolutely amazing. This is probably like the smartest business deal I have ever seen because it doesn't completely like take advantage of ChatGPT, right? Because obviously they gain a lot from the higher exposure and like the trust, the knowing that like, oh, Apple trusts ChatGPT. It's like that will do a lot for them to become basically their own company rather than being like, oh, the Microsoft chatbot guys, right? But then for everything else, Apple can still advertise their higher focus on privacy, security, and of course the personal context that goes into stuff like them understanding your settings, the actual device you have, the photos you have taken, your all kinds of your documents and things like that. So Google Drew for him complaining that everyone talks about all of that stuff up and down did forget 1/3 of that equation. He needs like the iPad OS 18 calculator to calculate this.
A partnership with OpenAI, and they're open to adding other large language models in the future. But yes, you'll be anonymous so that ChatGPT can't build out a profile on you.
I actually don't know, and partially I don't care what OpenAI does, because at this point, given the fact that I'm asked for every single time if I actually want to connect to OpenAI and ChatGPT, at that point, it's my responsibility to know what are their privacy rules, right? I know Apple's privacy rules, and Apple has to be very, very direct in communicating with me about their privacy rules, given that their stuff is pre-installed on device. With OpenAI, I'm asked every time manually. Of course, at that point, it also becomes my responsibility.
Store your data, you don't have to make an account with them, yada yada yada, all of this crap about how they went through all of these loopholes to make it safe and secure and private. Doesn't matter if they're sharing audio recordings in the background. No, don't worry about that.
Are they? What does that mean? Like, is that like a reference to like, hey, voice assistant? Because that is not how it works at all. But is there something I missed? Is there like an extreme privacy issue for Apple with voice recording that has been popping up over the last few years or months? Did I miss something? Because usually I don't miss stuff like that.
All that matters is that they made sure that this is the first safety-focused AI. But to me, it's usually the end-user experience that Apple kind of sticks the landing on.
But they do. They've taught the reason why Apple talks so much about privacy and security is because there's been a lot of concern specifically about the way that chatbots will have all the data on you. Every single thing you ask of a chatbot will basically make you know you like a human would know you, right? Your deepest interests and whatever. And that becomes then creepy once it gets shared out to ad sites. And if your YouTube algorithm is suddenly based on something you asked Google Gemini 5 months ago or something like that, that is what Apple is trying to say they aren't doing. And that is part of the end user experience. However, I've also said that sharing some data is not bad as long as you're A, are informed, and B, are getting a good product out of it, which is why I never had much of an issue like sharing my like data with like Google or Apple Maps when it comes to like feedback for the kinds of routes people take. Like, what do I care at that point? It's like they probably know my home location anyway. So just to why Apple is doing that, I said it like 20 times now, but like Apple has talked about the end user experience. They have talked about stuff like their Magic Eraser competitor. They talked about stuff like voice call transcriptions. They've talked about stuff like contextual Siri. They invested 50 minutes almost of the event for Apple Intelligence, and like 10 to 15 minutes of that were like privacy, security, partnership with OpenAI, things like that.
And with Apple Intelligence, feels like a whole lot of software locking and a whole lot of talk for just some minor quality of life upgrade.
Yeah, this is where I will criticize this video for like a deep unwillingness to understand the underlying technology. We have had this discussion with like when Apple eventually opened up Stage Manager to iPads older than M1, and people were like, you see, 4 apps can work on those devices. It's like, yes, but then when you actually engage in even stuff like resizing all those images, having a lot of like Stage Manager pre-setups, right? Because it's not just 4 apps on one page, it's multiple pages of Stage Manager that you can kind of preset. And yeah, we saw that those devices primarily didn't even suffer as much in terms of raw performance, but memory concerns did often result in older apps getting kicked out. Something that 4 gigabytes on iOS actually are pretty good at keeping older stuff in memory. 6 gigs of RAM iOS devices are basically as good as 12 gigs of RAM Android devices, and then 8 gigs of RAM on iPhone is like basically anything you could ever need. But now this stuff is changing, right? If Apple brought Stage Manager to the iPhone, I wouldn't be surprised if it was A17 Pro exclusive or maybe like even A18 exclusive. And now that we have large language models that take up, by the way, there was a rumor that it takes up like 4 gigabytes. That was not true. The 4 gigabytes was like an Llama thing from like Meta. They're like open source stuff. Apple's LLM seems to be between 1 and 2 gigabytes, and it also seems to be like different between the individual things you might be running. So there are probably multiple foundational models on the iPhone, and they're broken up so that each of them is smaller, can take up less RAM. It might reduce its precision or whatever, but we might get like a foundational model for like Genmoji generation, because God knows what kind of data you need. It's probably enough whatever Apple fed it to it once, and then it will be okay forever. And then we'll probably have like a foundational model just for text and things like that. That's kind of how I speculated, how Apple is keeping them so small, like below 2 gigabytes is very, very impressive, especially if it actually works well. But yeah, you still need that RAM. For one, you also need that storage, but most Apple devices would have enough storage for it. It's just funny to me how Drew will keep ignoring that aspect as we go throughout this.
Like, am I the only one that felt like most of the stuff they pitched is pretty gimmicky? I mean, it looks cool on paper.
Yeah, you were one of the few ones, but I will get to my no.
Or to be able to highlight a whole email and have it be completely rewritten for you, but
this is where like my first no comes in. It's like YouTubers are so completely incapable of imagining like what actual people do day by day, like responding to hundreds of emails potentially, sometimes maybe you wrote something with a little bit of a hard edge, then you might want to make it friendlier, right? Or you might have written something super basically, but now you want it to sound more professional. You wrote something in like text form, now you want just the key points, or you found something online. Actually, I said about this thing that like this almost looks utilitarian, right? It almost doesn't feel like Apple because it just feels like so basic, but it definitely feels like it's focused on the thing it's designed to do, right? And I just find it weird when he's like, oh, this is a gimmick. It's like, well, yeah, all AI is kind of a gimmick right now because those features didn't exist and we obviously kind of managed to live without them. But if you have like a free version of Grammarly in there, one that also can correct for like writing styles, and this is the very first version, by the way, I just find it weird when people will down talk it because, yes, that's a feature that used to cost money, wasn't as feature rich, and wasn't integrated, now being all those things.
Again, there were web apps and on-device apps that were already offering this. It's cool that it's native now.
So you would need to, for one, most of the good stuff was paid for, so you would need to pay for it. You would need to copy and paste that stuff that you've written into that other app, unless it works like system-wide, like sometimes they do on macOS especially, but they don't really do on iOS. So where's the complaint here? Because even saying, oh, it's like a gimmick, well, no, obviously, if like people already pay for stuff like that, why would it be a gimmick?
But at least the people I know are usually much more particular and careful about phrasing and wording. Now you got to read the whole email twice, and if you don't like it, you got to put it back. And aside from that,
yeah, but that's exactly what, like, instead of you reading it twice, you write it, you read it once, you rewrite it, you click on the rewrite, then you might do some personal changes on top of that, and then you read it again, and then you send it. It's not even necessarily more or less work, it's better work. That's part of what what the good guys have been saying about AI, which is that AI is not here to replace people, it's not about writing that email from scratch for you, it's about writing a better email if you might have like a writer's block for a moment or something like that, or you just cannot write nicely for a moment. So
just basic things that make Siri actually a little bit usable, like it understands the second request because it remembers the context from the first one. Again, features
that works partially already. It's just that Apple is much better at like a deeper contextual follow-up. It's not just like, I believe already you can say like, hey, like how tall is Barack Obama? And then if you ask her like, how old is he? I believe Siri will be able to answer that.
That have been possible through other voice assistants for years and years and years.
Yeah, with none of that stuff works on device beyond the voice recognition. Everything that is like more follow-up, more contextual, all of that stuff thus far, even before like the generative AI phase that we are in, like the Google Assistants, the Amazon Alexas, that stuff was always online. And the more Apple puts first on device, it's part of that is actually like that this is almost like the first device that does those other queries on device. And to my point previously about costs, if Apple was like to make a Siri version that basically gets all that functionality, but it always is in the cloud, that means that your old device now has always to do all that inferencing and then constantly upload data to the cloud and things like that. And now Apple's cloud would have to be like 10 times bigger potentially if they gave it like to all, like, let's say all devices that run iOS 18, right? Because if it's in the cloud, what does it matter what chip you run? Which, by the way, that isn't even like the iPhone 4S got Siri exclusively. Do we forget that Apple didn't port it to the iPhone 4? Right, a device with the same amounts of like memory, like sure, it was like a single core versus a dual core processor, but who cares? That stuff was completely on cloud anyway.
years, and now suddenly Apple's figured out how to do it, but they've decided that in order to access, texting.
Wait, by the way, yes, suddenly means Apple has been building their own LLM and foundational models for like 2 years.
Your voice assistant, or previous context, or just removing people from the background of a photo. All of these things, we want them to be done on device. Even though lots of things Apple was comfortable pulling from the cloud before, now they've...
Yes, that is the point. The more capable those models get, the less Apple wants to have exclusively on the cloud, but also it does come with a cost to them. They're not Google. Like, they don't have hundreds and hundreds of servers where they can like manage the work between like even like old Google Assistant and Google Search, right? Because sometimes people will ask something for Google Assistant. Well, they would have put it into Google Search anyway, right? So Google is like, well, we want those people on our services, so of course we kind of have to make Google Assistant still free to those people. And then, but Apple does not have that luxury. Apple does have their dedicated Siri service, but all of their private cloud compute stuff has to be basically completely brand new with expensive Apple silicon stuff in it. Yes, of course, Apple will limit the monetization. Well, they won't limit the monetization. They will try to monetize that effort by having you buy a newer and more expensive device. And before people start talking about like, well, it's iPhone 15 Pro exclusive, don't forget that none of those features actually exist in an end consumer state right now. By the time some of them launch in September, and many of them probably launch through October, November, December, and January, right? Because Apple said that some features will be coming out in late 2024. That could mean some will be delayed to like early 2025. That happens, right? By that point, we will also have iPhone 18s and iPhone 18 Pros out there. So that's already way more devices. It's like people like, and like I said that already, right? But like Microsoft was like fine announcing Copilot Plus exclusive to chips that didn't even exist yet. Yet Apple goes out of their way to like make this work on M1 devices and newer, and the already very well selling iPhone 15 Pro generation, and they're getting way more flack for that than Microsoft, which to me also says that people actually want those features more. They care more about what Apple is doing than they do Copilot Plus. And by the way, Copilot Plus isn't even that on-device focused as Apple is. Like, sure, a feature like Microsoft Recall has to work on device because it's literally that. It takes screenshots on your device and then analyzes them there. But like all your basic queries are very likely to still go through the web because Microsoft relies on like ChatGPT 4o for most of it. They are now trying to build their own foundational models and smaller models too, but not anywhere close to the effort that Apple is pushing to that kind of like AI. So yes, this is why Apple is talking about it. On-device AI is not impressive because just of its privacy and security focus. It's actually an engineering effort to make a foundational model that is still good, so small that it fits in a device that has like 8 gigs of RAM and like a 6-core GPU or something like that. So it cannot even accelerate that much beyond the 35 tops from the neural engine. It's so weird to me how people refuse to understand this.
Suddenly decided, you know what? If we're going to do AI, we need to make it super secure and private and safe. Therefore, we need a large language model that is really capable.
But you can literally do all the other stuff on other things, right? Like, you won't get the deep, like, contextual understanding that, like, Siri will have of your iOS device. But if you're fine with a ton of data collection, things like that, which you seem to imply, then literally go to Google and let Gemini handle all that stuff. Go to a Windows PC and let Copilot Plus handle all that device. And please don't complain at that point that you have to buy a Copilot Plus device instead of using your 3-year-old M1 Max MacBook Pro.
Really functional, and it only works if you have an A17 Pro or an M chip or better. I'm sorry, I just don't find many of these.
What was the question mark? Or better? Yeah, if it's newer than M1. Of course it works on that.
Features that intensive, in my opinion.
Yeah, your opinion is worthless here. You're not an engineer. It's like the effort here is also that whatever Apple might have right now in the works might not be what they have in store for you 3 months down the road into iOS 18. They might rewrite their foundational model for on-device processing to be, instead of 1.3 gigabytes, which is kind of the rumor we have right now, to be 1.8 or 2.1 gigabytes. At that point, obviously, it becomes even more ludicrous to try to port it to like an A16 chip or even like an A12X or an A12Z, right? It's like your opinion is kind of moot here. Nobody is saying that the user interface stuff couldn't have been ported, but this is a discussion as old as time. As I said, Siri itself wasn't ported from iPhone 4S to iPhone 4. Stage Manager was like allowed on devices with like A12X, A12Z, but like output external monitor support, where like the aspect ratio could change and stuff like that, and treating like it's like a secondary screen, that wasn't ported to those older devices, even though they had like 10 gigabit per second USB-C ports, so they would have been capable of that. I just... like this like he's saying this is like setting a bad precedent, but this is by far everything far from a precedent. We've had stuff like this for years and years in iOS, iPadOS, macOS, and even beyond Apple, right? Like all those AAA games that are now coming to Apple Silicon, guess what? They are exclusive too. They either run on Apple Silicon Macs, which, as he said, is M1 or newer. They sometimes run on iPads with M1 and newer, and sometimes they run on iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max that have the A17 Pro chip with 8 gigs of RAM, that new GPU with the way it treats shaders differently. It has dynamic cache and stuff like that, so it can actually overcome some of like its bandwidth limitations almost, and of course the higher efficiency from it being like 3 nanometer, its new CPU and GPU architecture in general, its faster A&E that allows for like a Metal FX upscaling that is based on neural engine rather than the GPU, which makes it better, but also like reduces the load on the GPU. There are a lot of reasons.
What I think this all really comes down to, because again, like Apple's...
Because you have to imagine also like the user experience. Imagine you run like Genshin Impact and then you open Siri and suddenly Siri has to like load 1.4 gigabytes of RAM into a task that is running on a foundational model. Now Genshin Impact isn't just suspended in the background at its lowest possible memory use. It's probably thrown out of that memory, creating a very, very jarring experience. While in an iPhone 15 Pro with 8 gigabytes, sure, Genshin Impact might still get close, but that likeness is now much lower.
Said they have neural engines on chips from 2018. The neural...
Nope, 2017 actually, because the 2017 was... No, yeah, 2017 is the year of the A11 chip. That was the first neural engine. It just was like basically only designed for Face ID to recognize small changes on your device.
Engine is not a new concept. There's all kinds
Yes, it's not about like Zuboito, welcome to the stream. It's not about by the way, Zuboito, no Apple sheep here today. The only Apple sheep we are talking about today is Drew. I just wanted to say, like saying, oh, we've had neural engines for years, so we've had GPUs for as long as iPhones existed, and we aren't arguing why Assassin's Creed Mirage is not getting ported to like an iPhone 3GS.
of machine learning that goes on with smartphone photography and iPhone photography that's been around for years and years and years now. And what I think this all stems back...
The funny part is that those are actually counter arguments to what he's saying, because those features exist on their own, right? They do like they do eat like RAM and GPU resource and stuff like that. I'm the top one Apple sheep. Well, thank you. No, I'm your sheep herder. You are my flock here. But yeah, basically the second is you activate the camera and things like that. Now it does its machine learning, so that all like fights for resources. And unfortunately, yeah, if you have a device with 4 gigs of memory or even 6 gigs of memory, and that device is based maybe on an older node, so it's not as efficient, so having all those things compete for resources will make it consume a lot of power. Apple does not want that. And I just find it weird how Drew, who obviously knows his way around an iPhone, right? This iPhone behind him, the iPhone 4S, right? That one never gave Siri away to the iPhone 4. And in fact, he does not have iPads here, but like the new iPad, right? The A5X iPad, right? Got Siri. While I believe older iPads did not. So yeah, I just find it funny. It seems TT Tech is the only one who doesn't love Apple Intelligence. I saw people like commenting in similar ways to what he is saying, but I believe that Drew hasn't been really engaged that deeply in the actual tech of a device, by which I mean, like, for years, I haven't really heard him talk about, like, oh, this new feature. And, like, remember the good old days when, like, what was it called? It was basically a feature for like higher detail inside Apple's camera and photos in like mid-light scenarios. So it wasn't quite night mode, but it wasn't like your regular daylight photos. And it was always taken with like a sweater, right? To show the details of the fabric and whatever. And I remember back in the day, every tech reviewer would like photograph themselves in a sweater and say like, oh, is it actually more detailed and whatever? And I just don't remember Drew doing that much of that in recent years. It seems like he like makes very basic statements on tech that he doesn't fully understand, like large language models, and he tries to make arguments like, oh, you should have backported this. And I'm not even arguing that a lot of it is impossible, but I am arguing that Apple is also a marketing company. Like, he will later on in the video, because yes, I did pre-watch this, asks like, why doesn't Apple just port that new Siri design to older devices, right? And the answer to that is, well, because Apple wants to market that design that goes from edge to edge with the new large language model based Siri. It's not just a new design, it's indicative of the new version of Siri you have. And when he asks like, why cannot Siri like do some inferencing between like your last question and your new question? Well, that thing is based on an LLM. It's based on a foundational model that, as I said time and time again, now takes up its own resources. Memory, CPU, GPU, A&E, whatever. It takes up like a full like a certain level of energy, and then that level of energy will like fluctuate, or basically based on how efficient your chip is, and then it will take more time on a chip that is slower. So yeah, this is how Apple differentiates it.
Back to is Apple Intelligence is mainly a marketing gimmick. It's not necessarily that Apple has come up with this.
Yes and no, which is like, I've actually said now that Apple has talked about a lot of ML things inside iOS and iPadOS, even stuff that is coming to iOS 18, iPadOS 18 on older devices, that they still called out like machine learning. But everything that is built on that kind of foundational model, that it goes beyond just data inferencing and stuff like that, that is Apple Intelligence. So Apple Intelligence is a name. It's an absolutely marketing term, and Apple's focus on privacy and security is part of marketing, but that marketing has a meaning. It's the same, like I mentioned that in my last stream, where I said like people will complain that like, oh, Retina display and Super Retina display and Ultra Retina display and Liquid Retina display and all those things, right? Well, those are just marketing buzzwords, and while they are marketing words, they all have a meaning. Like if you like gave me like a list, I could explain to you which device will have what kind of retina branding associated with it. Is it a standard LCD with pixel density that your eyes cannot discern at a reasonable viewing distance? That's retina. Does it have curved corners? Now it's a liquid retina. Unless it's OLED, then it's super retina. And for OLED, because it's easier to make those curved corners, we never needed a special term, because that's when the iPhone 10 came along and had like that curved glass and stuff like that. Is it a high dynamic range screen from Apple that reaches up to like 1600 nits of peak brightness on an individual part of the display? Well, now it's very likely to be called XDR. Is it a brand new technology like tandem OLED? Then now it's Ultra Retina, right? It's like marketing is absolutely like, it's company speak, it's sometimes double speak, it's sometimes dishonest, it's often very unnecessary, but that doesn't mean that it's inherently dishonest regardless of context. It doesn't mean that because Apple created a term like Apple Intelligence suddenly means that it's completely dishonest rebranding of machine learning features that we've already had before. In fact, Tim Cook talked about that with Marquez. He said that it's an evolution from, well, I said it, right? I don't think he said it directly, but he said that they've used ML and AI for years, but now their focus is generative AI. And generative AI, which, yes, we associate that with stuff like images, but it also applies to things like rewriting your text or like creating a summary of your email or a web article. That is generative artificial intelligence. This is something Apple brands as Apple Intelligence. This is something that goes beyond more simple algorithms and ML to foundational large language models. And because Apple sees more opportunity for that kind of data to be exploited and those kinds of features to be used in malicious ways, now even more so than they ever did with Siri, which granted Siri was dumb, so you probably didn't have to worry too much about her like becoming a world mastermind, getting us into World War III. But now that we have much smarter AI, this is where the focus on privacy, security, and especially the benefit of the user comes in. Tim Cook said what matters to him is not the underlying tech, which is what Drew has complained about, as if that was the case, but what matters to him are the features. But to explain to people why those features even work and how they work is actually very important, because a lot of people over the last 2 or 3 years have developed a pretty irrational fear about AI, and Apple needs to correct that, at least in regards to their own implementation.
Breakthrough new technology, they're just continuing to add a lot of features that would have been added regardless of if OpenAI existed or not. It's just they found a new way to...
Again, OpenAI, shut up, True, about OpenAI. Like, basically every feature that Apple showed during WWDC wasn't even based on OpenAI. Even the image generation on device wasn't OpenAI. It was an Apple-made foundational model, because Craig Federighi cared so much about that feature that he made Apple create one.
Brand them.
They even created a separate app for that. Do you think they created a new app for image generation that is entirely based on OpenAI?
Or scary thing that I'm not as big a fan of is they found a way to software lock them by putting them behind this walled garden of saying these are Apple Intelligence features and only these devices support that. It really gives them more excuse than ever to come up with software features that are somewhat handy, somewhat useful. Again, nothing really displayed necessarily blew my mind, although some
But that's good for you, right? Now that means in theory you don't even need a 15 Pro to enjoy what you think you will enjoy, but you already have a 15 Pro, so if there are like 2 or 3 features inside Apple Intelligence that you might like, even if you aren't blown away by them, then just enjoy it. This is always the burden of Apple. It's like they cannot create a tablet that is just a tablet. That tablet has to be a Mac replacement for some reason, even though nobody forces you. Apple is still building fantastic Macs, in fact better than ever now with Apple Silicon. Apple Silicon, by the way, partially eventually being only as good as it is right now because Apple was building like larger chip variants for the iPad, A9X, A10X, A12X, right? And then that eventually turning into M1 chips. It's like nobody's forcing you to interact with everything about Apple Intelligence. If you never want to generate a single image on iOS 18, Apple won't force you, bro.
It made my stomach feel a little weird.
Why? This is also like when people talk about like, well, we need to protect creators. Why? Was I ever gonna pay a creator to draw myself in like a spacesuit in a cartoon style? Because believe me, guys, I will use that shit for like my my thumbnails here, right? But if my thumbnail, unless that feature doesn't work well, at which point I know it will look creepy to people, and then I won't, right? But I was never gonna pay an artist to create those thumbnails for me, like unless I hit like 1 million subs or something like that, barely make anything from the channel. Like, what work is this taking away? What artist was specializing in this? It's like, bro, like we live in the 21st century. There comes a point where for certain stuff you get replaced. Not you personally, but if you have a hyper focus on this, well, there are probably still people, if you ever found jobs with that, who are willing to pay for it because they prefer the human touch rather than that of AI, right? But it's like if you were like a candle lighter, a lamp candle lighter in the early 20th century, and you were replaced by electricity, I'm not saying that the same thing will happen to artists, but if that was your output, like this, that the thing that supposedly makes people feel queasy and looks super bad, then I'm sorry, then you were a crappy artist. And you know why I know that? Because no artist that I know, and I live in Berlin, it's like an art capital here, like nobody does shit like this. People draw real stuff. They draw everything from like incredibly impressive realistic stuff to like impressionist stuff. They do like web design, which is incredibly artistic and precise and 1 billion times better than the thumbnails that I put out, right? But I'm not going to pay them to do my thumbnail, so I might as well use that. And if I sent like an iMessage to my mom, do you think I was going to call up an artist that I know and ask them to draw my mom as like a cartoon superhero? No, but I might ask an AI for that.
For the most part, it's just like, oh yeah, these are great, little quality of life updates, but now you're just saying, not only do you have to check whether or not your device has the capability to run the latest iOS, like can I run iOS 18, can I run macOS Sequoia? No, on top of that, now there's another layer of, okay, can you run the latest OS?
But this has always been the case. Like, remember when like iOS 14 dropped and like weather animations were only on devices with an iPhone XS chip or newer? Like, and Apple's excuse was that it was using part of the neural engine for that to make it much more efficient, that would consume way too much battery life on older devices. Do you remember that?
And do you have compatibility with our internal large language models? And if you don't, then, well, we just came up with a bunch of features that we can add to the latest hardware, but we can leave out a bunch of people from these new software features, which, again, I don't think are that technical. Like, it shouldn't take an iPhone 15 Pro just
completely uninformed inference. I'm not saying whether those features are that technical, which whatever that means, but he doesn't have the background to know that. I don't have the background to fully know that. I've heard people who originally believed that it would be that 4.3 gigabyte or 4.2 gigabyte Llama model, that it is almost even questionable if it can be handled by 8 gigs of devices. But yeah, and Zubot, you were saying TT is complaining a little bit too much. The problem is I'm not against complaining, but I'm for, and this is why I was such a big Rene Ritchie fan when he was still like doing YouTube videos. It's like, it has to be informed complaining, right? The problem that I have, for example, with Linus Tech Tips is that it often feels uninformed. When they complain about Apple, I'm always like, what? Like, no, I mean, I understand some of your gripes, but like with T9 dialing, for example, I was always like, bro, you know that Spotlight search, you can literally invoke it from anywhere at that point, and you can just type in the name with the full keyboard. You don't have to type it in on the crappy like T9 keypad, and then with the name, actually, instead of just doing a phone call from the phone app, next to the name of that contact, you can send a message, you can send a phone call, you can initiate a FaceTime call or whatever, right? So you have more options. It's potentially just as fast or faster. It's much more convenient because it's just you using a regular software keyboard rather than somehow going back to like T9 keypads. And I'm like what was your complaint here? And with Drew, I often feel like, bro, if you were continuously using like not even the latest hardware, but like even just one piece of hardware, and you like when he said like, oh, like Drew was the guy who said a couple of years ago that like the iPad Pro was like his favorite device, but now because of a lack of software updates, it didn't like stagnate, right, according to Drew, but it somehow became worse. And at that point, I'm like, what? Did it become worse at you reading like a book or scrolling through the web with multi-touch? Like, or watching a YouTube video on a device that is much lighter and comfortable than your 16-inch MacBook Pro. Like, what? Or even like a portrait FaceTime call or something like that. I don't get him sometimes. Yeah, but TT is complaining constantly in his videos, listening negatively. Yeah, and I also feel like the problem though with here is like, I think he believes that a lot of it is just ChatGPT or OpenAI. Right, I saw that because he already had a WWDC recap video that, but you can see like so many channels are like Apple wiped the floor with Microsoft, right? In the same week where Microsoft has to recall, see what I did there? Microsoft recall, Apple is like announcing a comprehensive suite of on-device stuff, of their own servers, and the partnership with OpenAI that could significantly weaken Microsoft's grasp over that company. But like Drew is like, oh, I don't love it.
To be able to type to Siri if you want to, remove someone from a background image, or just have Siri understand a little bit more context from earlier in the conversation, or of course just have that really clean all the way around animation whenever you activate her in the first place. But it's a trend we've of course seen Apple do in the past, where it's like clearly there's some software features that they could add to older hardware and they choose not to because they want you to buy the newer hardware. And I don't like that trend. I've complained about it on iPads and Macs and stuff in the past, but now seeing them kind of double down on it with this marketing approach of here's Apple Intelligence, and for the most part, a lot of the features...
Like, guys, I like literally, it's an accessibility feature that is literally called Type to Siri. I just activated it on my iPad and I just turned on Siri and it brought up the chat thing. Yes, it's not quite as like dual feature like the way Apple does it now, like where you can double tap like that... What is it even called? The navigation bar down below. But it still works. If you're somebody who basically never talks to Siri, then you just activate that. And by the way, like small recommendation, if you activate Type to Siri and you bring up Siri, it brings you up the regular keyboard and that Siri search interface, basically. You can still click the regular dictation button if at that point you still want to talk to Siri. So this complaint, to me, it seems like he doesn't even use Siri that much because it's a very, very easy workaround. If you're somebody like me who doesn't talk that much to Siri or even the other like chatbots or whatever, but sometimes you do want to type something into it, it's like, yeah, it's very much possible. It's very easy to do, Drew.
To me just seem like quality of life things that could be added to older hardware, but they're choosing to bunch together a lot of these features with stupid generative AI features like, oh, well, here's on-device imagery of your mom as a depressed superhero, or here's Genmoji so you can have T-Rexes with surfboards.
I don't get anybody who hates Genmoji. Genmoji is so fun. I believe that out of any Apple Intelligence features, this fall, when the first people start sending Genmoji from the iPhone 15 Pro, the iPhone 18, the iPhone 16, the iPhone 16 Pro, I believe teenagers will be running to their moms and dads and screaming like, my iPhone does not support Genmoji. Mom, Dad, I need a new one. And I fully believe that this will work.
And dresses, and I'm like, when the heck am I gonna use that emoji?
I mean, you don't. That is not the point, and you know that. That's an argumentum ad absurdum. It's a reductio ad absurdum. I apologize. It's like you take the most like weird example and try to like present it as like the creme de la creme of Genmoji. No, Genmoji is like, oh, I bought a new hat, right? And instead of sending a picture of yourself in that hat, you send like a funny Genmoji version of it, which it's like, yeah, that's fun.
So by bunching in the truly generative AI features...
By the way, Genmoji is a truly generative AI feature. Like, no ifs and or buts. Could you maybe get it to run on older devices if you created like a super small foundational model that is just Genmoji focused? Yeah, I could see that happening. But at that point, why bother? Like, just the efficiency difference between an A17 Pro and A16 will already be part of the difference of why you wouldn't want it to work there.
With the quality of life features, they've justified a way to just keep more and more people out of accessing the best software. And I don't like where this trend is continuing. Because
this is not a trend. This has always existed. It has not gotten worse. Apple's support for M1 devices is newer is, to me, proof that Apple is not blocking off devices willy-nilly. But hey, pop off, King.
Apple keeps this up and keeps trying to come up with software reasons for you to upgrade your phone. Even if you bought a $1,000 iPhone 15 Plus, it's not...
So, like, the price is completely irrelevant. Apple has not given all the new features to $52,000 cheese grater Mac Pros running on Intel and NVIDIA chips. Do you think we could see 12 gigabytes, not on the 16 Pro, 12 gigabytes is rumored for the 17 Pro models. And at that point, I actually wouldn't be surprised if there are some exclusive features coming to 17 Pro. I think Apple will have like a 2-year cycle now where they will give us features that we probably didn't care that much about, like more RAM and whatever. Maybe they will advertise things like faster storage and say that helps or something like that with all the device inference things and whatever, and Apple will monetize that. They will put it first on Pro devices. They will not give that stuff to like the iPhone SE or whatever. It's like, it's this idea is like, oh, Apple is gatekeeping older features. Like, where was that outrage that the iPhone 13 could do night mode, but the iPhone 12 didn't? No, sorry. Did the iPhone with A13 chip, so basically the iPhone 11 could do night mode, but the iPhone XS with the A12 chip could not. Where was the complaint about that? I went for 3 years without night mode because it's a feature that I didn't buy my device for. At that point, didn't exist on iOS. And at that point, it existed on iPhone 13 and iPhone 11 and iPhone 12. Before I upgraded eventually to the 13 Pro, it existed on like Google Pixels. And yeah, I was fine with that because I'm like, yeah, this is a feature I didn't buy my device for. I didn't even know that Apple would be adopting it a year later. That's up to me. It's like how MKBHD says, never buy a device for like specific software updates that you're waiting for. I always say buy a device with some expectation of getting some software features, some support. Never get cheated out of like at least stability, security updates, proper app support and whatever. But yeah, when it comes to new features that require like slightly newer cameras, newer processors, a little more RAM, whatever, faster memory, more memory bandwidth in general, faster storage, more storage. Never really complain about that.
Because you were supposed to go buy the Pro. That's the one that can run our large language models. And just to be clear, I don't see this changing. Just because they're announcing this now doesn't mean a few years down the road they're going to find some more Apple Intelligence features that they claim is now only possible with the iPhone 17 Pro.
Yeah, that will happen. Of course, that will have to happen.
Have the iPhone 17 Plus. I'm sorry, that neural engine is just not powerful enough. I don't like this direction. I know Tim was probably trying.
It's a meaningless thing to say. It's like, I don't like the difference. It's like saying, oh, I don't like that the GTX 1060 didn't get hardware accelerated ray tracing. Right? Even though it can run ray tracing and software, but it's just super duper slow. Right? Or that NVIDIA never made a version of DLSS that works with like older hardware, the way that AMD did with FSR. NVIDIA was like, no, sorry, we are an AI company at this point. If we make new AI stuff, we are going to make that at least somewhat exclusive to new hardware. They did the same thing with frame generation on the RTX 4000 series. People complained for a week, then they accepted it. Well, every year you can whine about it, or you can buy. Well, and the problem, Zoboito, is it's such an incoherent argument, right? Because every year people are saying like, oh, why should I upgrade to new iPhone? Old iPhone does everything new iPhone does. And then Apple is like, well, here are new features that don't work on older iPhones. At least not except for the newest current one, right? And people are like, how dare you? How dare you not give it to older iPhones? I was just joking that you weren't innovating. Now, I still won't call it innovation, but I want those features. I think those features are worthless, and I actually think you're just as bad as Google and Microsoft. But I want those features. That's pro-consumerism in my definition of that word that I keep changing every couple of weeks, because sometimes I criticize other companies and those companies behave differently than you, but I always need to come back to you, Apple. It's like, no, that's not pro-consumer of you. I ask you to give me devices that are highly differentiated from previous generations. Now you do that? Nope, not this way, bro.
To pivot Apple into a software company and have more memberships, but when that didn't really
this, like, oh my God, this comment
go as great.
He's saying it didn't work well to turn Apple into like a software and membership companies. Apple is handling $1 billion. Yes, like $1 billion of software subscriptions through the App Store and stuff like that. Apple has like tens of millions subscribers to Apple Music, Apple One. They make such bang with iCloud storage in terms of raw profit. Just, of course, the commission on the App Store itself. Apple TV Plus is one of the highest reviewed streaming services in the world right now. Shows like Dark Matter are like some of the most watched right now, even with Apple's relatively small install base of Apple TV Plus. Like, what is he blabbering on? Yes, Apple did not literally kill Spotify. But Apple Music is literally the second most subscribed to music service in the world. And its satisfaction level is higher than Spotify.
As they were hoping, they probably fell back to, okay, well, if the hardware can't change that much year over year, we have to start software locking more and more things.
But the hardware did change. We went from 6 gigabytes of RAM on the A16. And by the way, the A16 wasn't even that much faster than the A15, which did have slower memory. So let's forget like 2-year upgrades, which is usually the way we see processors and stuff like that. Let's just even say A16 went from 6 gigs of RAM to 8 gigs of RAM. We went with from 4 nanometer to 3 nanometer. We have a new CPU with a wider decode with faster machine learning acceleration. We have a new GPU that supports hardware accelerated ray tracing, mesh shaders, things like that. Of course, we get the overall efficiency bump from newer architectures, newer node, whatever. We have a new ANE that is much better at int 8 compute, so it can roughly double if you focus on int 8 at least, the performance of the A16. So what is the and by the way, the entire 15 generation of devices has better cooling, right? Slightly better cooling, and the 16 generation will further improve on that, but it's better than the 14th generation. And again, if we look back at the 2-year cycle, which is more how we should look at processors in my opinion, well, now it's way better than the 13th generation was at cooling, at memory bandwidth, which was still using LPDDR4X, right? And then the base 15 actually had 4 gigs of RAM, not even 6 like the Pro models. Then now, of course, you're jumping 2 generations of CPUs, two generations of GPUs. Like, it's like all that context. Zuboito TV Plus is really nice. True, yeah, it's amazing. I always advertise it basically for free, like, because I want people to watch Silo, Severance, Dark Matter, The Morning Show, things like that.
Dude,
And Sugar is pretty good. I bet Apple put Apple int on 14 Pro. It would be slow and maybe not usable. Well, yeah, Apple Intelligence. Sorry, I thought you meant for a second like just different integer. Yeah, but people would. Well, not even Drew. I think Drew is nuanced enough, but I think plenty of people would be saying like, oh, it's artificial, it's planned obsolescence, right? But Apple did back in the day, like gave iOS 7 to devices as bad, quote unquote, as the iPhone 4. And it substantially slowed it down with all its translucencies and just its, like, it was more RAM intensive, so it wasn't even that great to the iPhone 4S. And then it was clearly designed for 4-inch devices and eventually larger. So on the 3.5-inch device, didn't even look that great. Yes, C is also great. I didn't watch the last season of C for some reason, but season 1 and 2 of C is really good. I think most people tuned out from C because of the first episode where she prays, if you know what I mean, and they never gave the show a good chance. I actually think that this is Jason Momoa's by far best work.
Just hardware.
Ted Lasso is fantastic, but everyone knows Ted Lasso. I always try to bring up shows that people might not know. Like, everyone at this point watched Ted Lasso. Like, when you had like that 1 week of free Apple TV Plus, and like PlayStation, Xbox gave away like 6 months of Apple TV Plus, I believe everyone watched Ted Lasso at that point.
So I'm not trying to say every single Apple Intelligence feature could theoretically be added to an iPhone, XS. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying a lot of the best features of Apple Intelligence don't need to be generative AI features. They don't need large language models. And Apple's...
So, Boito, we need to make an episode where I just review Apple TV Plus shows that I've watched. Legacy of Monarch is great, but I did stop at 4 episodes. I plan on watching Godzilla -1 and Shin Godzilla, and then I will finish a Legacy of Monarch.
Kind of coupling them all together to keep people buying the latest and most expensive. Unless you're a Mac user, I guess. In fact, Mac users are probably going to benefit the most from Apple Intelligence.
It's funny because I've also seen people saying that the iPad will be the one to benefit most, but... whatever.
Intelligence, just because M1 chips have been around for almost 4 years now. That feels
and
weird.
And funny how Apple didn't lock the new features to M3 Max or something like that.
But yeah, MacBook Air from 2020 is going to be able to run Apple Intelligence no problem because
Hijack is fantastic. So, boy, what the f are you doing to me? Yeah, Hijack is great. Foundation is... I am a big sci-fi lover. It didn't connect to me. The second season is much better, but since I never finished the first, I tried to get into the second season without finishing the first, and it just didn't work for me. But Hijack is super fun. It's actually getting a second season, and it's still with Idris Elba. I thought it would be like more... like they hired somebody else to make it cheaper, but Apple is like really spending money on its artists, the CGI, stuff like that. It's really good.
It's got that new silicon in it, whereas the iPhone, even an iPhone you buy today from Apple, if it's the wrong one, not a 15 Pro, then you're already being left out of some pretty basic quality of life features. So
Silo is better than Fallout, but I understand what you mean. Never compare Silo to anything inferior to me. It's like Silo is so good. It's I don't know if it's better than Severance in my eyes, because I believe Severance had like the best season finale of any TV show in like the last 5 years or something like that. But Silo was great throughout it. It was also slow, like Severance in its build-up, but yeah. And by the way, yeah, of course, I don't watch sports through Apple TV Plus, but documentaries. Prehistoric Planet is one of the best like dinosaur things ever created, and BBC, like I believe it's a BBC thing, right? They were only able to do that because Apple guaranteed them crazy resources for it.
That's why I'm not terribly excited, like, even though I'm gonna get all of those features and I'll try.
Yeah, I still like there's a lot of complaining for something you are getting. This is a man of the people argument, right? Which is like, oh, I'm sticking up for all those people who aren't getting it. The hardware requirement of these. Oh, YouTube Cheesy, long fan of the show, has written one of his signature super long things. He is mistaken though by saying it's 4.3 gigs of memory, because this was debunked. This was to the Llama model from Meta. You can already type to Siri, just configure it either as a shortcut or an accessibility feature. It's quite handy. Apparently, yeah, you see, Drew is not engaging with the argument. People are trying to give him like tips to how he can already improve his user experience, but it's like that double tap is part of the new all-screen design. You can like it or not, but like Apple is bringing new Siri to Apple Intelligence devices, so who cares? Absolutely agree. It's not a 16. People are bringing up 8 gigs of RAM. I still think people are underestimating the difference in neural engine performance. My 13 Pro Max won't get it, but my M1 iPad will. Well, yeah, but like, and this is like, oh, where can I opt out of? You don't have to opt out of anything. Those features are not forced on you. Did you miss all that stuff? This is why when Drew says, well, why did Apple talk so much about privacy and security? Well, it's for people like this who say like, where do I opt out of this? Yep, that's true. RAM is the biggest limiter. Yeah, like Drew is making the same argument, like in a very, very like stubborn way. I appreciate that they're taking privacy so seriously, doing as much as possible. Sounds great to me. I assume this person meant like on device. And Drew was like, remember when they see Siri recording to third parties? Oh, that is what he meant. No, those companies were completely beholden to Apple's rules. It's just like saying that like call centers are now suddenly like completely disconnected from all rules. Oh my God, this is so disingenuous. Drew, what are you doing here? Like this was basically just additional manpower. That doesn't mean that those companies were like, oh.
I'm out for you. None of them really.
Honestly, his engagement with the comments, it reminds me a little bit of the Hardware Unboxed guys, where they's like super duper nice in like real life engagements and in their videos, but then you give them like somewhat the anonymity of text, whether it's Twitter or the comment section, even though people obviously know who it is still behind that, and they will get much more vicious.
Jumped out at me as really useful and exciting, and
then why complain that you aren't getting all of them?
Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you feel differently and you're super excited to try them out, but what do you guys think? Is Apple genuinely, intentionally locking a bunch of software features to the latest hardware, and this is just them proudly doubling down on that? Or
I mean, it can be both, right? Apple can believe that, it will take us another 3-6 months to optimize it for the iPhone 15 with 6 gigabytes. And the second we like upgrade our LLM to be like even 100 megabytes larger, well, now now it will completely ruin the device. And even if it can run it, well, now it consumes 25% more energy doing so than the 15 Pro, which means it gets hotter and it has lower battery life. It's like those things have to be considered. It's a cohesive package. It's the same reason why like the PlayStation 4 didn't get the user interface of the PS5. Believe me, it's not like the PS5 user interface is so feature rich that it couldn't run on a PS4. In fact, by all accounts, it has fewer features in some ways than the PS4. But the new UX, the new general like OS code is optimized for a new gen of CPU, GPU, a certain amount of RAM versus like the RAM that you dedicate to games versus the RAM that you dedicate to the OS and things like that. So even if you could throw like older resources at it and still get to a decent balance, well, now you're also committing to supporting that older hardware now with newer software for years and years to come potentially. Apple does not want that. Apple wants a clean cut, saying 8 gigs is the minimum. On iPhone, it has to be also like a decent balance between power consumption and battery size. We think that 5nm devices are good enough for tablets and laptops. On smartphones, we kind of think that 3nm, where it gets efficient enough, given that smartphones have also much smaller batteries. Things like that, right? But yeah, it's not none of that is good enough for Drew.
Do you think that they're being genuine and you seriously could not add all of these features to even an iPhone 15 with an A16 chip or an iPhone?
Well, it depends, right? Apple does sometimes scummy things with software lock. I have said that one thing that I disagreed with was them not giving the iPhone 14 Pro all the camera stuff that they gave to the iPhone 15, even though they have the same A16 chip, the same amount of memory, the same bandwidth. Yes, the regular iPhone 15 has a better main camera in some ways because it's a newer generation sensor, but it's a smaller sensor, so that makes it in other ways inferior. But Apple should have given the latest Smart HDR5 capabilities, in my opinion, also to the iPhone 14 Pro. And I was actually critical of Apple for that. I don't think, though, I made a video. I probably should have. I need more critical stuff on this channel so that all my opinions are known. You can follow me on Twitter for more stuff, but yeah, I usually do like in defense shit on this channel because I see videos like that and I feel like responsible for like cleaning up some misconceptions. But I should provide like my full nuanced views out there.
14 Pro. It's just not possible that you could type directly to the voice assistant.
And again, he's completely ignoring the fact that it has worked as an accessibility feature for, I believe, like several years.
Thoughts? Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody.
Yeah, so there isn't that much that I want to even say here at this point. It's weird to me when people clearly are not fully informed and give us takes like this, because it's not like I'm saying that Drew needs to suddenly be an expert on large language models to like provide his opinion here. But I definitely do believe that he did not do his full diligence here to provide that kind of commentary. Again, I like Drew. I haven't liked his style that much recently, but I still think he's a good dude, and I have appreciated a lot of his videos over time, especially like his pixel rants. Those are kind of iconic to me. I believe those are amazing content. Maybe at some point I should react to them just to give Drew a lot of praise. But yeah, and the reason why I wanted to cover this is not even because of Drew or like I need to correct specifically what Drew thinks, but to me this has a lot to do with the fact that I've seen people share not even those exact views, but some other criticism that I have also like try to debunk, like stuff in regards to like the fact that Apple supposedly still does steal your data. And you can see Drew's also like trying to slightly imply that, but like saying, well, they did used to share your voice data with third party for Siri. Yeah, but that was like for yeah, this has absolutely nothing to do with the discussion, nor was that ever like a big like privacy concern for real. It was just something people didn't like, and then Apple, I believe, stopped doing that because Apple listens apparently to feedback. So yeah, and when it comes to software locking, again, we can argue whether the LLM is 1.3 or 4.2 gigabytes. Regardless, it still eats up memory, it still eats up energy. So putting it on the most efficient chips, the chips with the best cooling, the chips with the fastest A&E makes sense. Whether you want a different cutoff point, that's neither here nor there. We all admit that there would have to be a cutoff point somewhere. And as I said, there is a precedent for a company literally announcing Copilot Plus features, AI features, for processors that weren't even on the market yet. So take that as you will. Versus Apple's approach in making their features available to over 3.5-year-old Macs. But yeah, so oh, by the way, I believe I opened Safari, but you cannot see that because I put myself now on full screen. I was basically showing you the stuff I was showing at the beginning of the video. But regardless, these are my thoughts on those issues. I believe they are nuanced enough. Maybe you can argue that they are too pro-Apple. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you for tuning in live, both for this video and others. The last few videos have done pretty well for the channel. So thank you so much for that. I'll keep on updating you for all the other stuff that is coming in the world of Apple, in the world of Apple competition. Like I do want to especially cover all the Qualcomm X Elite stuff. But for now, I am basically finished. I do have to go to sleep now. Thank you for your amazing support. As always, do the YouTube jazz, subscribe to the channel, comment on the videos, share them out to family and friends who you think might enjoy them, like them. It helps out tremendously with the algorithm. If you catch me live, leave a super chat or a super sticker. It's greatly appreciated. Direct support gets directly reinvested into the channel to help us grow the community, to help improve video, audio quality, internet quality, whatever. And beyond that, if you want to support this channel directly in the long term, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. So thank you. I'll see you in the next one. This is Mark Tech tuning out.